In this showcase short, I share this, a little-known and unauthorized edition of Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, released in Russia in the early 1990s. Despite how well it sold then, today this remains one of the most difficult copies of Yellow Brick Road to get. Learn all about the label that released it, about the producer who created that label, and about that producer's preoccupation with footwear. Footwear? True story. Welcome to Collecting Elton. So this is a vinyl edition of Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, released in Russia in 1993. It's a double LP. It does not have the trifold sleeve like the original DJM version did. It has a simple gatefold sleeve, one that contains all song lyrics and reproduces nearly every, if not every, interior illustration from the 1973 original. And this edition was released on a Russian label called AnTrop, which formed in 1992, not even a full year after the fall of the Soviet Union. So these were Russia's earliest years as an independent post-communist state, a period when some of the most famous pop rock albums from the West were finally becoming available in Russia for the very first time, at least for the first time outside of the black market, and Elton's Goodbye Yellow Brick Road was one of those albums. Yellow Brick Road was not the first Elton John record to circulate in this part of the world. Elton and Ray Cooper's tour of Soviet Russia in 1979 broke new ground for access to Western music under the communist regime. 1 year later, Melodia, the Soviet Union's state-owned and operated label, released Elton John Sings, an abbreviated version of Elton's 1978 album, A Single Man. In 1988, Melodia also released 2 compilations of Elton's hits from the 1970s. But for some music fans, these state-approved albums weren't enough. Unsatisfied, they would turn to the underground, where illegal copies of band albums could be found if you knew whom to ask. Most of these bootleg copies were tapes, dubbed so many generations down that the hiss often overpowered the music. But with the fall of the Soviet Union in '91, commercial labels began to form almost instantly, labels that manufactured and sold discs much like record labels did in the West. But I also said in this video's introduction that this copy of Yellow Brick Road, released on the AnTrop label, was unauthorized. And it's true, it was. So if by '91 Western pop music was no longer banned in Russia, and if AnTrop was a legitimate record label, and it was, then what makes this edition of Yellow Brick Road unauthorized? The 3 Elton John records Melodia released in the late '80s are interesting. Although the label's edition of A Single Man featured the Polydor logo, it's not likely at all that Melodia licensed anything from Polygram. Soviet copyright law did little to protect foreign sound recordings. But at least these 3 releases on Melodia were Kremlin approved. People could get them without resorting to the underground. And when the Soviet Union dissolved a few years later, new frontiers opened for the spread of Western music in Russia. The AnTrop story begins with a man named Andrei Tropilo, a Russian music producer who'd worked for Melodia in its last days as a state-owned record label. In the 1970s and 80s, Tropilo had been well known, maybe even notorious, for promoting the spread of rock music and the recordings of Western rock artists in Soviet Russia. In 1993, Tropilo founded his AnTrop label, its name derived from the first syllables of Tropilo's first and last names, Andrei Tropilo, AnTrop. AnTrop used Melodia's pressing facilities in the former Leningrad, by then renamed St. Petersburg. From 1992 to '95, AnTrop released vinyl albums by the Beatles, Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, the Sex Pistols, Rolling Stones, Deep Purple, and Guns N' Roses, to name a few. In its first year alone, AnTrop sold 11 million records, and for a young label in a market itself still quite new, 11 million records wasn't bad. There was just one problem. None of these albums had been made or sold with the permission of their copyright owners. And AnTrop wasn't the only Russian label doing this. But in the Russia of 1993, these releases were legal under existing copyright law. Part of the problem was that after decades of state control over what little Western pop music the Soviet Union allowed, by the '90s Russia was inexperienced at regulating pop music's distribution in a free market. And Goodbye Yellow Brick Road wasn't the only Elton John album legally pirated during this period. I also have a legal pirate Russian copy of The One, also released in the early '90s but by another label. Finally, when Russia updated its copyright laws in 1995, foreign sound recordings received better protection. The first Western music label to set up shop in Russia was Polygram, then Elton's own label in most parts of the world. Launching as Polygram Russia in 1995, the label would become Universal Music Russia in 1999 and remain there for more than 20 years. The company's arrival in the 90s pointed the way for other Western music labels to establish offices in Russia, bringing Western models of business to Russia's new record industry and ending gray market products like AnTrop's edition of Goodbye Yellow Brick Road. Now, when you look at the sleeve for the AnTrop Yellow Brick Road, probably the first thing you notice is how fuzzy it looks. Well, it seems the printer based this LP sleeve on a CD booklet, probably the West German Yellow Brick Road CD by Polygram. In 1993, that CD was still the standard CD edition of the album in most parts of the world, and the back of the AnTrop vinyl edition reproduces the West German CD booklet's design concept, something otherwise unique to Polygram releases of Yellow Brick Road on CD. But the sleeve's most striking features are the changes AnTrop made to the original artwork. The album's title and artist name were translated into Russian, of course. Inside the gatefold, all type had been reset and printed black. But David Larkham and Michael Ross's original illustrations for each song were included, albeit with signs of light retouching. Ian Beck's original sleeve art provided the basis for the AnTrop sleeve, but here AnTrop took many liberties. On the cover, some trees have been changed, the sunset looks different, and the bird flying above the sunset is also different. This retouching may have been necessary because of detail loss when converting the CD cover to an LP sleeve. But the AnTrop sleeve also shows unnecessary retouching, like adding a bird to the sleeve's back, and on the front changing Elton's shoes from sparkly ruby platforms to more common-looking flats. It's easy to think, perhaps, that all Andrei Tropilo wanted was to update the sleeve. After all, who still wore platform shoes in 1993? But retouching sleeve art was typical for AnTrop, for the label believed such alterations might help protect them from legal trouble down the line. Consider also the alterations AnTrop made to other album covers in its catalog. Most famous among them, perhaps, the AnTrop cover of the Beatles' Abbey Road, on which Paul wears shoes and John is the one walking barefoot. Not many AnTrop covers featured shoes, and certainly Tropilo retouched other features too. But his meticulous fussing in these examples at least suggests that footwear had some special meaning, though I'm not sure what. Maybe it was some kind of private joke. But as Tropilo passed away in April of this year, we may never know the answer. Okay, so how does it sound? Well, not terrible, but not very good either. I'm certain that Tropilo sourced the music from a CD that was typical of AnTrop and of other Russian labels of the time. That doesn't automatically make it bad. If anything, a CD would have been far preferable to some of the bootleg tapes that circulated in the Soviet days. But if Tropilo indeed used Melodia's equipment, left over from its days of state control, I don't imagine it was the very best equipment, nor do I imagine Russian record buyers cared that much about sound quality. For them, nearly anything would have sounded better than a hissy old bootleg. Is the AnTrop Goodbye Yellow Brick Road essential Elton? Well, it goes without saying that the album itself is essential. In fact, for Elton John, you probably can't get more essential than Goodbye Yellow Brick Road. As for the AnTrop edition specifically, I'd say it's essential if you're a serious collector, and like me, Yellow Brick Road is one of your favorites, if not your #1 favorite Elton John album. And that's because, arguably, this edition is more than just some discographical obscurity. It's an artifact from an important time in modern political and cultural history. It reminds us of the hunger that existed for Western pop music in a part of the world that had previously lived so long without it. But I call it essential only because of that history. The AnTrop edition is not an authentic representation of the album, so it cannot and should never replace a legitimate copy of Goodbye Yellow Brick Road in anyone's collection. It's as one great artist once wrote, "Not as bright in life as the real one. It's never quite the same as the real one." Indeed not. As always, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video and or learned anything new, please click the like button. My videos really depend on it. And if you haven't yet subscribed to my channel, please consider doing that too. My channel really depends on it. And I'll be back soon with more stories and advice about collecting Elton.